The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as William gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. Kate sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at the building that had become far too familiar over the past few weeks. Neither of them spoke about what they might find inside today. 3 weeks ago, their world had changed completely. What started as a routine checkup for their youngest son, Louis, had turned into a nightmare that no parent should ever face. The doctors had been gentle but direct. The tests showed something serious, something that would require all their strength as a family. William parked the car in their usual spot, the same one they had used for every visit since the diagnosis. It had become a small comfort in a world that suddenly felt uncertain. Kate reached over and squeezed his hand. They had learned to find strength in these quiet moments together. Walking through the hospital corridors, they passed other families. Some looked hopeful, others carried the weight of difficult news. William and Kate had become part of this community they never wanted to join. The community of parents fighting for their children's lives. Dr. Matthews was waiting for them in his office. He was a kind man with gentle eyes who had been treating children for over 20 years. He understood that behind every case file was a family whose world hung in the balance. Today, his expression was different. There was something in his face that made Kate's heart race. Louis had been responding well to treatment, better than anyone had expected. The 8-year-old boy who loved football and building blocks had shown incredible bravery through procedures that would challenge most adults. He never complained, never asked why this was happening to him. Instead, he worried about his parents and whether they were okay. The conversation in Dr. Matthews' office lasted nearly an hour. There were charts, explanations, and medical terms that William and Kate were still learning to understand. But the message was becoming clear. Louis was getting better, much better than the doctors had initially hoped. As they walked toward Louis's room, Kate felt her legs trembling. The relief was overwhelming, but she knew they weren't out of the woods yet. There would be more treatments, more tests, more days of uncertainty. But for the first time in weeks, hope felt stronger than fear. Louis was sitting up in bed when they entered his room. His face lit up when he saw his parents. He had been working on a drawing, carefully coloring each section with the concentration that reminded William so much of Kate when she was focused on her charitable work. The drawing showed their family standing together outside their home. Everyone was smiling, including their dog Orla. At the top of the page, Louis had written in his careful handwriting, "When I come home." The innocence and hope in those 4 words hit both parents like a physical blow. William sat on the edge of the bed while Kate smoothed Louis's hair. They had agreed not to tell him about the good news yet. Dr. Matthews wanted to run a few more tests first, but sitting there with their son, seeing his determination and spirit, they both felt something shift inside them. The next few hours passed slowly. Louis showed them his latest drawings, told them about the nurses who had become his friends, and asked about his siblings, George and Charlotte. He wanted to know if they were taking care of his hamster properly and whether they were practicing their piano lessons. It struck William how mature Louis had become through this experience. The carefree little boy had developed a wisdom beyond his years. He seemed to understand that his parents needed reassurance just as much as he did. Often it felt like Louis was taking care of them rather than the other way around. Nurse Sarah, who had been caring for Louis since his arrival, stopped by during her rounds. She had a special fondness for the young prince and always made time for extra conversations. Louis trusted her completely, and she had become a bridge between the medical team and the family. As evening approached, William and Kate prepared to leave for the night. They had been staying at a nearby hotel, unwilling to be too far from the hospital. The 30-minute drive back to their regular lives felt impossible when Louis needed them close. Louis hugged them both tightly before they left. He whispered to Kate that he had been praying every night for God to help him get better, so he wouldn't make them sad anymore. The comment broke Kate's heart because Louis had never made them sad. If anything, his courage had made them prouder than they had ever been. Walking back through the hospital corridors, William and Kate felt different than they had in weeks. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something they hadn't dared to feel before. Real hope. The kind of hope that comes from seeing progress, not just wishing for it. That night in their hotel room, they talked about the future in a way they hadn't been able to since the diagnosis. They spoke about family vacations, school events, and all the ordinary moments they had taken for granted before. These simple dreams now felt precious beyond measure. Kate called her parents to update them on the day's progress. The relief in her mother's voice was audible even through the phone. The entire extended family had been holding their breath for weeks, trying to stay positive while preparing for the worst. Tonight, for the first time, Kate could offer them genuine reason for optimism. William reached out to his father and brother to share the news. The royal family had been incredibly supportive throughout the ordeal, adjusting schedules and responsibilities to allow William and Kate to focus entirely on Louis. The understanding and flexibility had meant everything during the darkest days. As they prepared for bed, both William and Kate felt emotionally drained, but more hopeful than they had been in weeks. Tomorrow would bring more tests and more waiting, but tonight they could rest knowing that their son was fighting this battle and winning. The last thing Kate did before falling asleep was look at a photo on her phone. It showed Louis laughing during a family picnic just months before the diagnosis. His joy was infectious, and his smile could light up any room. Seeing that photo reminded her that the Louis they knew and loved was still there, still fighting, still hoping to come home. 2 days after the encouraging news from Dr. Matthews, William and Kate arrived at the hospital to find Louis sitting in a wheelchair by the window. He was fully dressed in his own clothes for the first time in weeks, not the hospital gowns that had become his uniform. Nurse Sarah was helping him with a puzzle, and both of them were laughing at something Louis had said. The sight took Kate's breath away. For a moment, she could almost forget where they were and why they were there. Louis looked like himself again. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his eyes held the spark of mischief that had been missing for so long. Dr. Matthews joined them shortly after their arrival. He carried a folder of test results and wore an expression that William and Kate had learned to read carefully over the past month. Today, his smile reached his eyes in a way that made Kate's heart race with anticipation. The latest tests showed remarkable improvement. Louis's body was responding to treatment better than anyone had dared to hope. While they weren't ready to use words like remission yet, the progress was undeniable. For the first time since this journey began, Dr. Matthews could talk about discharge plans and returning home. Louis listened to parts of the conversation with the serious expression he had developed during his hospital stay. He asked thoughtful questions about what would happen next and whether he would be able to play football again soon. Dr. Matthews assured him that with time and continued recovery, all his favorite activities would be possible again. The conversation turned to practical matters. Louis would need continued treatment as an outpatient, regular checkups, and careful monitoring, but the intensive phase that had required him to stay in the hospital was nearly over. If everything continued to progress as it had been, he could go home within the week. Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she had cried over the past month. These were tears of relief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude. William reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently as they both processed the news they had barely dared to hope for. Louis wanted to call his siblings immediately to share the news. George and Charlotte had been staying with their grandparents, trying to maintain some normalcy while their parents focused on Louis's treatment. The separation had been difficult for everyone, but particularly hard for the close-knit siblings who were used to spending every day together. The phone call was emotional and joyful. Charlotte's excited squeals could be heard throughout the hospital room as Louis told her he would be coming home soon. George, trying to sound mature at 10 years old, asked serious questions about whether Louis was really feeling better and when they could play together again. Planning for Louis's discharge became the new focus. The transition from hospital life back to normal routine would need to be gradual. Louis had spent a significant portion of his recovery time in a controlled environment, and returning to the outside world would require adjustments for the entire family. William and Kate spent the afternoon discussing logistics with the medical team. There were medications to manage, follow-up appointments to schedule, and warning signs to watch for. They took detailed notes, asked questions, and tried to prepare themselves for becoming Louis's primary caregivers again. That evening, they decided to stay later than usual. Louis was more alert and energetic than he had been in weeks, and they wanted to soak up every moment of his improved condition. They played games, worked on puzzles, and listened to Louis tell stories about the friends he had made among the hospital staff. Nurse Sarah stopped by during her evening rounds and found the family engaged in an animated game of cards. She paused in the doorway, smiling at the scene. In her years of pediatric nursing, she had learned to recognize the moments when a family begins to heal. Tonight was clearly one of those moments. As the evening progressed, Louis began to tire. The improvement in his condition was remarkable, but he was still recovering and needed more rest than usual. William helped him get ready for bed while Kate organized his belongings and prepared for another night at the nearby hotel. Before they left, Louis asked them to sit with him for a few more minutes. He had something important to tell them. With the serious expression that had become familiar during his treatment, he thanked them for staying with him every day and never giving up hope. He told them that he had been scared sometimes, especially during the first few days when he didn't understand what was happening to him. But seeing them there every morning when he woke up had made him feel safe. He knew that no matter what happened, his family would face it together. William and Kate were moved by their son's maturity and insight. At 8 years old, Louis had faced a challenge that would test most adults, and he had done so with remarkable grace and courage. They told him how proud they were of his bravery and how much his positive attitude had helped them stay strong. The walk back to their hotel felt different that night. For weeks, leaving the hospital had felt like abandoning Louis, even though they knew he was receiving excellent care around the clock. Tonight, leaving felt more like a temporary goodbye rather than a fearful separation. In their hotel room, William and Kate began making plans for Louis's homecoming. They discussed how to help him readjust to life outside the hospital, how to gradually reintroduce him to normal activities, and how to support his continued recovery while allowing him to feel like a regular child again. Kate called her mother to share the encouraging news. The conversation was filled with tears of relief and discussions about family gatherings that could finally be planned again. For weeks, the extended family had put their lives on hold, afraid to make plans or celebrate anything while Louis was fighting for his recovery. William reached out to his private secretary to discuss adjusting his royal duties as they transitioned into this new phase of Louis's recovery. While the intensive hospital phase was ending, Louis would still need significant support and attention as he regained his strength and returned to normal activities. They also talked about how to handle the public aspects of their situation. The royal family had managed to keep Louis's health struggles largely private, but they knew there would eventually need to be some acknowledgement of what they had been through. For now, their focus remained entirely on Louis and their family's healing. As they prepared for sleep, both William and Kate felt a sense of anticipation they hadn't experienced in weeks. Tomorrow would bring them one day closer to taking Louis home. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, they could finally see a clear path forward. The last thing they did before turning off the lights was look at photos from happier times, images of family vacations, birthday parties, and ordinary moments that had taken on extraordinary significance during Louis's treatment. Soon, they hoped, they would be making new memories and adding new photos to their collection. For the first time since this journey began, Kate fell asleep easily. The constant worry that had kept her awake for weeks was finally beginning to ease. In its place was a cautious but growing sense of hope for the future. The morning of Lewis's discharge arrived with unusual sunshine streaming through the hospital windows. William and Kate arrived early, bringing with them a bag of Lewis's favorite clothes from home and a small stuffed elephant that had been waiting patiently on his bedroom dresser for his return. Louis was already awake and sitting up in bed, practically vibrating with excitement. He had been asking the nurses every few minutes if it was time to go home yet. His breakfast sat barely touched on the bedside table because he was too excited to eat, though Nurse Sarah had convinced him to drink his juice. Dr. Matthews arrived with the final paperwork and discharge instructions. He spent considerable time going over the medication schedule with William and Kate, explaining what symptoms to watch for and when to call immediately. While the prognosis was excellent, Louis's recovery would still require careful monitoring over the coming months. The process of leaving took longer than expected. Louis wanted to say goodbye to every nurse, doctor, and staff member who had cared for him during his stay. Each farewell was emotional, as the hospital team had become like an extended family during the most difficult weeks of the young boy's life. Nurse Sarah presented Louis with a special gift, a photo album containing pictures of all the artwork he had created during his stay, along with photos of him with various staff members. She had been secretly working on it for days, wanting to give him something to remember the people who had helped him get better. The wheelchair ride to the hospital exit felt ceremonial. Louis waved to other patients and families they passed in the corridors, and several staff members came out of their departments just to wish him well. It was clear that his positive attitude and brave spirit had touched many lives during his treatment. When they reached the hospital entrance, Kate felt her breath catch in her throat. The sight of Louis sitting in that wheelchair, ready to leave the place that had been his world for weeks, was overwhelming. But this time the emotion was pure joy mixed with profound relief. William brought the car around while Kate stayed with Louis. As they waited, Louis talked excitedly about all the things he wanted to do when he got home. He wanted to see his hamster first, then play with his building blocks and maybe kick a football around the garden if he was feeling strong enough. The drive home was filled with Louis's observations about how different everything looked after being inside for so long. The trees seemed greener, the sky seemed bluer, and even the traffic seemed more interesting than he remembered. Kate and William exchanged smiles as they listened to their son rediscover the world outside the hospital walls. When they pulled into their driveway, George and Charlotte were waiting at the front door with barely contained excitement. The reunion between the siblings was emotional and joyful. George had prepared a welcome home banner, while Charlotte had picked flowers from the garden to decorate Louis's room. The first few hours at home were magical. Louis moved slowly through each room, touching familiar objects and rediscovering toys he hadn't seen in weeks. Everything seemed new and precious to him. Kate followed close behind, not wanting to let him out of her sight after so many days of hospital supervision. Louis's grandparents arrived in the afternoon, bringing with them a celebration lunch and more hugs than any one child could possibly need. The reunion was tearful and joyful, with everyone marveling at how much stronger Louis looked compared to the last time they had seen him in the hospital. The afternoon was spent quietly in the garden. Louis sat in a comfortable chair while his siblings played nearby, close enough to include him but careful not to overwhelm him with too much activity. Kate watched from the kitchen window as William sat beside Louis, both of them simply enjoying being together in their own space. As evening approached, it became clear that Louis was getting tired. The excitement of coming home, combined with the adjustment of being away from the structured hospital environment, had taken more energy than expected. Kate helped him get ready for bed in his own room for the first time in weeks. Louis's bedroom looked exactly as he had left it. but somehow it felt different to all of them. The space that had once been taken for granted now felt like a precious gift. Kate tucked him into his own bed, surrounded by his favorite stuffed animals and familiar blankets. Before falling asleep, Louis asked if they could leave his bedroom door open. He had gotten used to the constant activity of the hospital and found the quiet of home a little strange at first. Kate assured him that someone would always be nearby and that he was safe in his own home. William and Kate spent the evening discussing the new routine they would need to establish. Louis's medication schedule required precise timing, and they needed to balance giving him a normal childhood experience with ensuring his continued recovery. It would require patience and flexibility from the entire family. Kate called Dr. Matthews to report that Louis's first day home had gone smoothly. The doctor was pleased to hear that Louis was settling in well and reminded her that some adjustment challenges were normal. The important thing was that Louis felt secure and loved while his body continued to heal. The extended family began planning a gradual return to normal activities. There would be no big gatherings or exciting events for a while, but small, quiet celebrations of Louis's recovery could begin. Everyone understood that this was a marathon, not a sprint, and Louis's long-term health was the only priority that mattered. As the days passed, a new normal began to emerge. Louis's strength returned gradually, and his energy levels improved steadily. The daily medical routine became as natural as brushing teeth or eating breakfast. What had once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable. William returned to some of his royal duties, though he maintained a reduced schedule to be available for Louis's medical appointments and to provide support during the adjustment period. Kate focused entirely on Louis's care while maintaining normal activities for George and Charlotte. 2 weeks after discharge, Louis's follow-up appointment showed continued improvement. Dr. Matthews was pleased with the progress and began discussing a gradual return to school and normal activities. The conversation felt surreal to William and Kate, who had once wondered if such normal concerns would ever be possible again. The experience had changed their family profoundly. They had learned to appreciate ordinary moments in ways they never had before. Simple things like family dinners, bedtime stories, and weekend morning cuddles had taken on extraordinary significance. Louis himself seemed to understand that he had been through something serious, though he processed it with the resilience that children often display. He talked about his hospital friends occasionally and sometimes played doctor with his siblings, but mostly he focused on being a regular 8-year-old boy again. Months later, when Dr. Matthews used the word remission for the first time, William and Kate found themselves in the hospital parking lot where their journey had begun. But this time the tears were entirely tears of joy. The scene in front of them, Louis running ahead to the car, excited to go home and play with his siblings, no longer stole their breath with fear, but with overwhelming gratitude for the miracle of ordinary life.